welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP, you're going to get 20% off your order with that code FNP at simbody.com. You're really, really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks ? Kicks.
Boy, and just like that, we're set for UFC Fight Night, Santos versus Ankalaev. And listen, at the start of the week, you have so many fights on a fight card. You never know if you're going to make it to Saturday and still get all of those original bookings. But here we are. We made it through the week. We did it. And all 28 fighters made the weight successfully. And just like that, everybody is there in the chat. Joseph Moore, VT, David, we've got Alan Moody, Starsmith 77 Porter, still going with the longest name that I read out there in that comment section. Donnie Dime, Sean MMA 2, Clay is hanging out,
everyone?
Joe Lausnon, and so on and so forth. Lord Nikon as well, and Jesse Crayford. And I will continue to try and do my best to hit up everybody that's over there in the comment section. I've already turned just about as red as the red on the sweatshirt. But Matt,
You look like Dana White when he was introducing Conor McGregor to fight Floyd Mayweather.
what's going on, everybody? No, what was it? The rating!
You're trying to look like that a little bit.
Yeah, he went balls to the wall. That was the Toronto press conference when he really got into it. What's up, Canada?
We didn't need this to be a whole...
No, we didn't, but it's a lot of fun. But overall, again, when we do look at this card, it is a fun one. There's a lot of prospects, a couple of second times out. Actually, there's 3 of them. Kamuela Kirk looked great in his debut against Makwan Mirkani. Obviously, a little bit of confusion as to whether he won that fight or not. And Makwan got a big fight coming up next weekend against Mike Grundy. Old Solomon Grundy. But when we look at this fight, Matt, again, so many different fun ones out there. I know with kicks, we flip it on over to the fight of the night, but so many tough ones to choose from. I'm really looking forward to this card coming up, and a nice early one, too.
I think it should be a really fun card, and I am happy that you mentioned this. Like, even when I was going through the Instagram page, they'd be like, oh, Kicks is early today. It's kind of nice. Gonna have a nice, easy-going Saturday. I'm excited for this card, though. We've had a lot of fighters on short notice have really big opportunities in the last couple of weeks. Of course, Renato Moicano stepped up to fight RDA in the pay-per-view. You had Bobby Green only a week before that stepping up to fight Islam Makhachev. Terrence McKinney has a very similar opportunity this weekend and today in his fight against Drew Dober. I think that's a phenomenal fight that isn't getting talked about nearly enough, because if McKinney is able to win, yes, we know him for the fast knockouts, and yes, we know him because of how great he looked his last time out too with that great submission. But if you beat someone like Drew Dober, that's when people really start taking you seriously as a contender, so I think that's going to be a great fight.
Booking that fight against Carlos Diego Fajea. Steven over in that super chat saying, big Miranda Maverick guy, but a little spooked by the height difference. Thoughts? She normally fights a lot of taller fighters. I mean, it's almost like, I'm trying to think, who was it? John Lineker was able to get the win over Bibiano Fernandez on Friday. He's always a shorter fighter. There's somebody else that I'm thinking of that's coming up on...
Eric Blanchfield and Macy Barber do match up very similar, though, with Miranda Maverick, so I do understand why you might be a little hesitant, but stylistically, she does offer a lot of really, really tough... avenues in that fight. I know we'll get to it a little bit more, but I like Miranda Maverick. Sorry, not trying to combine her two names quite a bit on this card.
Ray Borg taking on Bandejas. That's who it was last night, too. There's a big time height difference. We flip it on over to our fight of the night screen, and Bruno Silva said there's no way to make history if you're not brave enough, and it seems like he wants to go out there and strike. He said he doesn't really plan on doing the Damian Maia route. here against Alex Pereira, I think that's an awful idea, but it makes for a fun fight.
It's pretty cool, though. Like, I'm happy to hear that as a fan of fights. When you're fighting Alex Pereira, the first question you should probably ask yourself is, how do I take this fight to the ground? So the fact that Bruno Silva has just openly admitted that, hey, I have no intentions of doing that, does make this fight even more exciting than what it already was. And trust me, I've been fired up for this fight for a long time. I think this is a great fight, though, and I do think this is going to be one of those ones where the winner could find themselves as that, like, maybe 14th, 15th ranked middleweight by next week. I know Pereira is very inexperienced, especially in the UFC, but I really do think that if he gets this win over Bruno Silva, it does sort of fast track him into the rankings. Then from that point, we can sort of figure it out to get him up to a title shot against Israel.
Joseph Moore, I thought Bandejas won as well. And if we go to our second pick, Song Yadong, Marlon Moraes. I mean, Marlon making that camp out of Tiger Muay Thai. And again, I see a lot of people picking Marlon Moraes for all the right reasons.
Really?
I mean, you look at it out of his fights, and yeah, he's getting his chin checked in the last 3. But in those fights, there are all sorts of good things that you can point to as to how Marlon became such a force over with World Series, how he became such a force all the way up to that title shot. Obviously, his last win was against Jose Aldo. It was one of those Bandejas Ray Borg fights where at the end of it, we're wondering who won. But ultimately, Marlon gets the win, and then Jose Aldo gets the title shot. So a little odd out of that one. But out of this fight, I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I think this should be a phenomenal fight. You set it up perfectly. Marlon may not look great lately. He's not really in his prime, if I think we're all being very honest with ourselves. But he's always got that one moment in every fight that makes you think he's got the chance to win. It could be a knockdown, it could be a takedown, it could just be something big and explosive that makes you think, oh wow, this is the magic Marlon I grew up knowing. But we do know that, like, he's been hit clean in a lot of his fights. Even the first fight against Rafael Assunção, he was cracked. Against John Dodson, he's been dropped. So durability has always been a bit of an issue for him, and I feel like now it's starting to really catch up to him. But Song Yadong, similar to what I said earlier about Terrence McKinney, he also has a really big opportunity this weekend. You go from beating unranked fighters and having good fights with guys like Marlon Vera and Cody Stamen. Like, those are good names, don't get me wrong. You beat someone like Marlon, that really just sets you up to a top 5, top 10 type of a fighter. And I do think Song Yadong belongs in that spot in this division.
VT saying, side note, rough showing for Kevin Lee last night because he busted his ACL in the first round. And Diego Sanchez, to his credit, actually looked pretty good with the striking.
Looked way better than I thought he would.
Yeah, overall, I really enjoyed the card, except for the part where Khabib had to sign off on the fact that they basically just kind of, sold the farm on how good Khabib was. The old, congratulations for getting into the Hall of Fame. And then they had Cejudo and Sonnen and Usman who were on the commentary doing a separate video montage for how cool he is. It was pretty weird.
But it's a King's MMA or a Dominance promotion.
Yeah.
Very heavily.
Oh, and Ali was a part of it too.
I'm sure he was.
Congratulations. But when we look at this card, again, as you know with question mark kicks, we'll go all the way from the bottom of the card back up to the top. We'll recap the entire thing at the end. I had a hard time going with the QMK parlay today. There was a lot of chalk on it, so if you feel like fading it, you're not going to hurt my feelings, and if I get it wrong, you're not going to hurt my feelings.
I'm excited for this card, though. I really am excited to break this down one last time.
This card and then next weekend's card, I know I'm already dialed in for that one, but they are both a lot of fun and as good as Fight Night cards
100%.
will get. So we'll move on down, and we'll start with the start. We have Azamat Murzakanov taking on the man himself, Tafon Nchukwi. And this is another one of those fights. I said with the Marlon Moraes fight, where he's taking on Song Yadong, there's a lot of people who are vocal about, listen, maybe Marlon can turn it back. Maybe he can show us what got him to the title. With Tafon, it's like, maybe he can show us what he showed us against William Knight in a big underdog spot with CFFC. Like, I don't get the sentiment here. So I look at this fight. Tafon is an odd duck in terms of his bases in MMA because he has a striking background. He has a kickboxing background. He's 13-1 in Muay Thai. But you look at the way that he fights, and sometimes he starts to get offensive with his takedowns, but his takedown defense, it holds up in certain fights, and then it doesn't in others. And the biggest trouble that I have for Tafon is, what's the weight class? Because he was kind of in that cruiserweight, 225, 235 area when he came into MMA at heavyweight or at cruiserweight. Then he comes to the UFC. It's 205, it's 185, now we're back up to 205. Taking on Azamat Murzakanov, a guy who Dana White said when he won on Contender Series, this guy's probably a middleweight. And then he gets booked against Marcin Prachnio, and that fight falls out. Then he takes on Jared Vanderaa on days' notice. Vanderaa not deemed medically fit to fight. So you got Murzakanov coming in at 216.5 for that one. He makes weight for this fight. When you look at this one, I see over in the comments section, Cody rather, saying, Nchukwi, go down the, and I can't tell what your emoji is. And Billy is saying William Knight is trash, though. But when we do look at this fight, Matt, again, for Tafon, at his best, he's pressuring, and he actually throws a surprising amount of volume. But then in fights where he just doesn't look all that good, and those have only been few and far between, he has low output, and he's not able to really meet that forward pressure of his opponent.
He does not fight like, I don't know, the used car salesman who tried to sell him to us. Like, we have been sold a false bill of goods because for Tafon, you're right. He does like to mix in the offensive takedowns sometimes. He is almost more of a grappler than you would assume by his background because he is a really good striker. And in the small glimpses, too, of fights where you do get to see him start throwing combination, he will have success. It's just, he's never really been able to have sustained success in the octagon for minutes and minutes at a time to where, wow, you're very convinced that he's out there winning with either his output or his wrestling consistently. And that's why I think he's going to struggle a lot with Murzakanov.
Jake and Bake hitting us up in the super chat. Let's get into it. Cheers, boys. And for Jake and Bake, baseball is back, so that's very exciting. But yeah, when you look at this fight, Matt, for Murzakanov, I mean, he's supposed to take on Joaquin Christensen in the UFC in, 2017. A little bit of Boldenone, a little bit of USADA suspension. He goes over to Brave, wins that open weight Grand Prix, has the fight on Contender Series that we didn't really learn much about him in that fight.
How awkward would an elevator ride between Jeff Nowitzki, Murzakanov, and Bruno Silva be?
And then Carlos Felipe getting his walking papers.
But I'm just mean these two guys fight on this card. It's kind of wild that they both had very, very, very similar circumstances.
But when I look at this fight, for me, Murzakanov, much later on his feet, much more susceptible to mixing in the takedown. Donnie Dimes saying this dime is for the boys. Murzakanov will look like a mini Fedor en route to stopping Nchukwi.
But here's the thing. I don't think Murzakanov has some crazy high ceiling to where he's going to be around for 10, 11, 12 UFC fights. Like, we've talked about this a lot, especially this year with the UFC bringing up a lot of these sort of older prospects, if you will, or people making their UFC debut in their 30s. There will be some benefits and there will be some positives, and I'm sure there's going to be a few fighters who come over and they make the big show who never otherwise would have been able to, and they're probably going to go on some kind of Jan Blachowicz-esque run because this is MMA and weird stuff happens. But for Murzakanov, he leaves himself very wide open with some of his striking engagements, and at some point it's going to get him caught. And it might not get him caught against Tafon tonight because, let's be honest, he's not fighting the most experienced guy in the world. But once he does work his way up into the ranks, if he is ever able to, like, I don't think Dominic Reyes is the greatest, most technical fighter of all time. But even Dominic Reyes, a guy who can slide backwards and counter effectively, like, that's somebody who would cause Murzakanov absolute fits. So I don't necessarily see the highest ceiling for him, but I think he's going to have a lot of fun fights, and I think today will be one of them.
Well, if you have a look at Fight Night Picks over on the Instagrams as I log into it, I'm professional, but we will have a look at those votes because we throw those out there before every question mark kick. 73% going with Murzakanov to get the win to 27% who have Tafon Nchukwi. And if we have a look at the odds for this fight, your underdog is Nchukwi, open to minus 145. He's a plus 163. And for Murzakanov, open to plus 125. He's a minus 196. I have Murzakanov. I've seen a lot of people really high on him this week. I dial it back a little bit because, again, Mohamed Fakhreddin just had a big win over with Brave CF. I saw that on the old Brad Katona card. How about that? Brad Katona doing the damn thing. But for me, I look at that fight, the fight against Guido Innocent, and those two fighters are a lot bigger than Azamat and Murzakanov. I think he's going to have success in this fight mixing everything together. But again, if he comes out flat and leaves himself out there where he's just winging combinations together, Tafon can hit him quite damn hard.
Yeah, but I still have Murzakanov.
Same. All right, so we'll move on to our next fight, Matt. Kris Moutinho coming in, taking on Guido Cannetti, and this is one where all the support is with Kris Moutinho because he accepted a hellish beating in his UFC debut on short notice when he took on Sean O'Malley on a pay-per-view main card where he earned a fight of the night, and in that fight, he accepted much, much damage. Now, I know he had a rib injury. There was an interview that I listened to. I want to make sure I get it right. New England MMA, this was back in December, that forced him out of his bout. I believe that was with Luis Smolka, if I'm not mistaken. But for Kris Moutinho, a good opportunity to get a win against Guido Cannetti, who was 8-6 in pro mixed martial arts. He's 2-5 in the UFC. He was 0-2 on the Ultimate Fighter. But when I look at this fight, Matt, it is a little bit different than just a 9-5 fighter, an 8-6 fighter. These guys are on the fringes of the UFC's hottest division of bantamweight.
Well, that's why they are a 9-5 fighter and an 8-6. Like, they exactly are as advertised, and there's no other smoke and mirrors. Like, Guido Cannetti every now and then will show you a part in his fight where you're like, wow, that was a really nice takedown for a bodied up 40-year-old. But the problem is, when you do those really nice takedowns as a 40-year-old with a lot of muscles, you tend to get tired as the fight goes on. And Guido Cannetti just sort of falls into that category every single time he fights. And it is one of those cases where you just kind of have to assume he's going to lose the third round of every fight that he's in, because the output really will tail off as the fight goes on. And with Kris Moutinho, I'm not here to tell you he's ever cracked into the rankings. He'll probably get another bonus at some point, just because I do think he's going to have sort of this fight of the night style friendly fight in him, no matter who he's in there against. You don't have to be great to win fight of the night, Craig. So, I really do think Moutinho, just from his sheer pressure and style, he's always going to eat more shots than you probably want, and I do think that's always going to make for a fun fight. I just think his cardio is slightly going to edge him out in this matchup.
Kris Moutinho definitely has better cardio than Guido, so let's do it, because they do this on Contender Series. Let's do this. It's a little bit impromptu. So, stamina goes to Moutinho over Guido Cannetti, right?
Yeah.
100%.
But also, stamina means so much in MMA that I think that overshadows a lot of whatever's coming next.
Volume goes to Kris Moutinho because he just walks in and hammers away. And he did that on the regional scene too. This isn't just a Sean O'Malley thing. That's the only thing that I've heard out of the Kris Moutinho camp of the world this week is he had a fight against Sean O'Malley. Let's just talk about that one. But when it comes to his volume's definitely better than Cannetti. Cannetti tends to wait and bait, throw his left kick to the leg, to the body.
Throws hooks from the hips, too.
Throw his hooks from the hips, throw a lot of power. So volume goes to Moutinho. I don't think we have a disagreement there. Guido Cannetti has the power advantage, even at 42. The guy, all he does on Instagram is lift weights.
If you matched him up with Francis Ngannou, I would have to pause for a second just to make sure he didn't have the advantage over him.
Depends on who has the better knees.
Exactly.
And then when it comes to overall fight IQ, I would say Kris Moutinho has more wins. We're getting friggin' close.
They both dropped out of whatever college was offering that course.
It is difficult. Now, Sharif is saying, I've got Guido. VT saying he trains 30 minutes up the road from me. I look at the odds for this one. They were close at the start of the week when we originally made the video. Moutinho opened a plus 105. He's minus 152. Guido Cannetti is now a plus 127. I talked a lot about Pat McAfee in the original one. Pat McAfee probably witnessed one of the most gruesome injuries last night at WWE SmackDown where Big E broke his neck. So that was kind of crazy.
I saw it on Twitter. People were talking about that.
Bad stuff. Bad news bears. If we have a look at the votes for this one at Fight Night Picks, 71% of the fans going with Kris Moutinho to 29% going with Guido Cannetti. The super chat from Lord Nikon. You guys are the freaking best. Matt, how far are you into Elden Ring?
I've played a good amount of hours into it. I'm like level 80. I just turned it on before I came up here to do this show. So it's a great game, though. I really like it so far.
But Matt, yeah, overall, the total pick for this one, we're still split on this one. I still have the knock him out, drag him out, Guido Cannetti. I'm hoping that he wins the first round, wins the second round, and then we'll see what happens in the third round.
I'm hoping none of you guys put your hard-earned money on this fight, though, because it's not worth it.
No, that's it. I mean, Kris Moutinho, if he's going to win, I see him winning by decision or maybe a late stoppage. For Guido, first round, stoppage, and maybe a decision.
If Cannetti gets off to a big enough start, maybe he can just sort of sit on a lead and hold off in the third. But again, I really do think that the overall pace of this fight really will decide who is the winner. And I do think Moutinho is going to be the one leading that dance.
So we'll go to our next one, Matt. Dacha Lungiambula taking on Cody Brundage. And the message is out there on my Twitter account and on the Instagrams where, hey, Dacha's pretty big. And to that I say, hey, he used to be a heavyweight and a heavyweight champion with UFC. Exactly. And he's the man that knocked out Alain Badeau before Badeau made it to the UFC, which in hindsight's not that impressive.
I was going to say, you're the only person who's ever used that as like a big accomplishment. I like it, though.
But for Dacha in the UFC, it's been a mixed bag. He's a guy that spent time at 205. He spent time at 185. And his last time out, he took on Marc-Andre Barriault, who he now trains with at Sanford MMA. And Sanford MMA, for what it's worth, guys switching to that gym, sometimes they have good success, sometimes they don't. But when it comes to a guy like Dacha, he has two weapons. Overhand toss judo throws, tricky trips and sweeps, and an overhand right. And that's pretty much it. And the odd thing for Dacha is with his stance, you'd think he could step into a jab every once in a while, but he never does.
It felt like earlier on in his career he did use the jab a little bit more, but it does feel like he's fallen in love with his power as he's sort of progressed, because I do agree with you. He doesn't have great weapons to set up his power shots, but his power shots do look really good, just sort of in a vacuum, if you will. And here's the thing, this fight against Cody Brundage isn't really going to tell us that much about Dacha, former champ, because if you're a believer in him, then he should beat Cody Brundage. Let's all just be very honest about the fighter who we thought he was going to be when he came into the UFC. If he loses to Brundage, it's probably going to be a lot of clinch work. I wouldn't expect a lot of striking in this fight if it is going to be a Brundage win, and I know he has made improvements with his striking, but why would you even give Dacha the chance? Like, if you keep it in the clinch, if you collapse all the distance, you're not going to give him any space to land a power shot, and it's going to make it a lot harder for him to win. Now, Dacha in that clinch is really tricky. He's got really good footwork too and great balance, but I do worry about him defending some of those overall takedown attempts from Cody Brundage. So I think game plan is oddly way more important in this fight than it normally is, or than what we normally bring up, because for Brundage, if he decides to go out there and to try to jab with Dacha and sort of play that game with him, at least early on, we could be on our way to an absolutely wild Dacha champ KO. I keep on saying champ even though he hasn't been a champion for so long, I hate doing it, but if the fight does start to go longer, you could definitely see a way for Brundage to win.
Yeah, I mean, so for Dacha Lungiambula, you looked at it, and going into, his last few fights, especially his last fight, he was training out of Extreme Couture, Francis Ngannou was there, so on and so forth, and they root each other on. And for Dacha, he had Dewey Cooper in the corner, and Dewey Cooper, a winning coach from last night with Kevin Lee. You love to see that.
A 10-1 favorite.
Yeah.
If he was the losing coach, we'd have some problems.
It was wild stuff. I mean, me sweating it out, the minus 1100 Ray Borg bet, yikes. But when it comes to this one, with Dacha, not a ton in the arsenal, but what he's good at, he is very good at. For Cody Brundage, he came out as a kickboxer's last fight, which he is not. He is very much a wrestler, rinse and repeat with his takedowns. We talked about the lineage that he has in his back pocket from collegiate wrestling. And when you look at this one, let's just have a quick look over at the odds, because Dacha Lungiambula was the favorite at the start of the week. He is a slight favorite right now as it loads on Best Fight Odds. So odds open at par, he's minus 133. For Brundage, he is at a plus 112. And with the fans, not a lot of them going with Cody Brundage here. 64% with Lungiambula, 36% for Brundage. Over in the comments section, boys, we're split on this. I wouldn't go heavy on either guy. Sinister FX saying Dacha needs TKO or he will lose maybe. VT was calling me the hydration king. It's Yuzu matcha green tea. That's what I'm going with this week. But yeah, I mean, you look down through the comments section, Mr. Guy saying Brundage is an off-brand Jason Witt, but he doesn't get knocked out as easily.
He could, though.
Yeah, and he did against William Knight. So, he just wrestled himself into exhaustion
But
early.
this is my problem. Cody Brundage didn't even look that good grappling against Nick Maximov when they were grappling, and that does concern me. And I know Maximov is a very good grappler, but it's not like in the UFC you've been all that impressed by Nick Maximov. I know I haven't been, even though he's gotten some really big opportunities. So for me, I don't look at Brundage and think, wow, just with one takedown, he's going to be able to win this fight from a positional standpoint. I do think Dacha's going to have a little bit more defensively than what some people might assume, and that's why I do have Dacha in this fight.
I don't love Dacha in those wrestling exchanges when it comes to those freestyle or against Greco-Roman guys, he'd have a lot of success. So I'll just stick it with freestyle wrestlers. But I do like Brundage in this spot. I think he's going to be able to rinse and repeat with his takedowns. I like how his striking's improved since he's gone to Factory X. There have been improvements when you go back and watch some of that regional tape. And I think he's just going to continue going and going and going. And this one, unlike his last fight on short notice against Nick Maximov, I think this one should be a little bit. VT saying not impressed by Maximov at all. Neither am I. So we're split on the pick on this one, Matt. And then we move into Mazo and Maverick. And that line for Miranda Maverick has been juiced throughout the week. I mean, we talked about it at the start of the week. She was what, like a minus 250 favorite, if I'm not mistaken? I'm going to go back. So Saturday, minus 267, minus 270. She's minus 350 at this point. For Sabina Mazo, open to plus 130. She's plus 274. And she is not the only fighter on this card coming out of Teixeira MMA and Fitness. Alex Pereira also out of that gym. And you might say, but Craig, I thought she trained at a King's MMA. She does, and she has. But she made the trip over East Danbury, Connecticut way to train with a Glory kickboxer and maybe work in some of the grappling. It was a little bit weird when you looked at it that way. But when I look at this fight, Matt, Sabina Mazo, when she's walking backwards at distance with her kicks and her jabs, is almost when she has the most success in her game. that does not work against Miranda Maverick. And if Sabina Mazo wins this fight, I will be very surprised.
I won't be very surprised. Let me just lay out a quick game plan for why I think Sabina Mazo might be able to win this fight. When you're fighting someone like Mazo, it's not really... It's more of just a trial to see if you like getting hit or not. And it's a weird thing to say in a sport where it's basically the only goal is to not get hit and to hit your opponent. But when you're fighting Mazo, all you have to do is not respect her power because she doesn't really have any. Now, with her kicks, she can get them up. She can set them up with her hands a little bit. But as long as you pressure her, and that really is the only key, if you put pressure on her, she will start to fold throughout fights. Like, if Maria Agapova can go out there and look like a world beater against you, we've got some issues.
Maria Agapova literally did the knock him out, drag him down fight.
Yeah, and that's what we say you have to do to Agapova to just sort of make her fold under the pressure. And I know Miranda Maverick, she had a lot of hype early on. She, let's be honest, hasn't really met those expectations as of yet, but she's still very young in this division. And the division's still basically wide open. Like, when you have a champion who's so dominant like Valentina, nobody expects her to get beat for a very long amount of time unless she gets some awful injury or something. So I really do think Maverick's going to be around in this division for a long time. And I think this is a great fight to get her back on track. The only thing about this fight that is a little odd to me is maybe the UFC is just done with Mazo. Maybe they don't think that they can turn her into a talent. But this fight, to me, feels like a loser goes home type of a fight. And normally you would give the prospect with Miranda Maverick someone maybe aging their way out of the division a little bit more with a matchup like this. Because for me, even Miranda Maverick might be on the chopping block. You lose 2 fights in a row, then you lose to someone like Sabina Mazo. It's not a great place to be at in the UFC, so I really do think that this win is extremely important for both fighters.
Yeah, and this is a really, really odd one, too, because both fighters, 24 years old, both of them on 2-fight losing streaks. I think they'll keep them around, and we've seen it here. I mean, these young fighters coming in this women's flyweight division in particular, reaching high highs.
But these ladies have been around for a while now. They're not as young in the division as you would think. And even the likes of, like, Molly McCann had success and didn't have these long losing streaks. I just mean... having a 3-fight losing streak is a big, big problem if you're an unranked fighter in a division not a lot of people are clamoring to see.
Yeah, so to me, I'm hot and heavy enough on it with Maverick, still at a minus 350 today to have her as the first leg of the QMK parlay. I know that's disappointed people in the past, going back, looking at that fight against Macy Barber. I don't know what the hell the judges were seeing in the second round. Maverick won the second round. She definitely won the first round. She didn't win the third, but we're here, and it's a loss on a record.
She got destroyed by Erin Blanchfield, though, who is someone that we consider in her same category of fighter, and that's why I'm a little bit lower on Miranda Maverick, I think, than most, because when we say you are the top prospect and you're supposed to be out there convincingly beating other top prospects, well, you had a close fight with Macy Barber, who was coming off an ACL surgery and hadn't even looked very good recently.
It wasn't
I agree
close.
with you. I thought Macy lost that fight, but still, the fight was close. You can't say it was a one-sided fight. And then she got washed by Blanchfield, and I really thought that she was in that same level with Blanchfield. I just need to see something out of Maverick tonight to really make me think that she can get back on the path to being a contender.
Eagle Eye saying, do they even read the comments? No, Eagle Eye. It's all pre-recorded. We're all in the Matrix. So both of us going with Miranda Maverick in that one. Now, at the start of the week, we disagreed on this one. Damon Jackson taking on Kamuela Kirk, and these two guys fight in similar yet dissimilar ways. You know what I mean? Like, Kamuela Kirk, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, really good offensive takedowns, really good defense in terms of his takedown defense. And if you look at it with Kirk, his biggest hole kind of at the start of his career was his striking. And we definitely saw that in his fight against Billy Quarantillo. He turned that knob up to 10 and then threw it away in the first round. And then in the second round, Billy Q is known on the streets as a little bit of a cardio king, and he was able to come right back hot and heavy in that second round, get the win over Kirk. But since then, Kirk has looked very good. Obviously makes the incredibly short notice debut against Makwan Amirkhani, who has a fight coming up next weekend, and Kirk is able to get that win. Now, the judges, the fans, the MMA media members, there was a lot of disagreement on that one, because if you watch the fight, Kirk was the one that landed the more effective strikes. Makwan just continued to go for takedowns in that one. You can draw parallels from that to this fight against Damon Jackson, because Damon Jackson's one of those guys that's going to try and get all squirrely, get into the clinch, get it down to the mat, and make it ugly. And even with Damon Jackson, he's one of those fighters. I know I hate it, and I know you definitely hate it too. Man, this guy, he's off his back. What the hell's he doing grappling here, like Charles Rosa does, and we saw that. But Damon Jackson's one of those guys, and it worked against Mirsad Bektic. Obviously, he was losing that fight until he won it. That's a kind of a common theme in a Damon Jackson. But oh, by the way, he's won 19 friggin' fights. He's lost 4, and he's got a draw and a no contest now. this is one of those fights. It gets incredibly interesting. So over there in the comments section, AG saying Kirk has pillow hands, and also saying this is the closest fight on the card. James is saying all aboard the Alex Pereira hype train. And I'll go with Sharif saying I wanted to go Jackson, but I don't know. Could see this being a 50-50. I agree with you, Sharif. I could see this being a 50-50.
This should be a really fun fight. Damon Jackson is interesting because, like you said, he just wants to make the fight ugly no matter what, be it on the ground or on the feet, and he just kind of wears on you with his pressure. You never really look at a Damon Jackson fight and think, wow, he's going for a lot of takedowns right now. He just kind of ends up in that position because I'm pressuring you, I'm going forward, and at some point I'm going to either run into the cage and we're just going to start clinch grappling, and next thing you know, someone has a submission. It's a frustrating style, but when you're fighting someone who's in that, like, Julian Erosa, Damon Jackson, Billy Q category, I think you do need big power to hurt them on the feet, to really get them to stop with their forward motion, and that is the one area that I don't know if Kamuela Kirk's going to really be able to make Damon Jackson pay for it. Now, if Jackson does start to reach for his takedowns, it's something we talk about a lot. It's sort of over-telegraphing, making your intentions known. Then I could see Kirk getting some of those nice little counter shots off on the in-betweens and really making him pay for some of that forward pressure. But at the end of the day, I really do think that the combination of durability and pressure from Jackson really is unique. And I know he didn't look good against Ilia Topuria, but hey, nobody does. The scale does sometimes. I know we'll talk about that later, but anyways, I do like Damon Jackson in this matchup, though.
So if we have a look at the odds for this one, because at the start of the week, they were kind of all over the place. Damon Jackson right now, they're pretty well pick 'em odds. He opened a -145 favorite. He got up as high as a +136, and then after last weekend, they dropped. So he is a -114. If we look at it for Kamuela Kirk, you could have had him at a -166. Today, you can have him at, -106. I would take him at -106 in this one. I like Kamuela Kirk, and again, Kamuela is one of those guys, I definitely see him having the better gas tank. He's the younger fighter.
I don't know about that. Just because Damon Jackson's whole style is based on output. He might have the better gas tank. I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I just think the way Jackson fights is so, like, unrelentless that even if Kamuela Kirk has the better gas tank, I do think the fight's going to wear on him at some point.
Sasha really wants to see some of those likes out there. We would definitely appreciate that one. And Sean saying, check Tim Elliott's story. Not you boys, the community. Sean, is he picking on us? Because Billy Q did that one time. And sometimes you look silly if you're going to make picks, but you can throw it in your Instagram story if you want. Still split on this pick, but again, this is one of those fights. Like, I'm really eager to see this one. It's matched incredibly well for 145.
Ton of great fights on this card.
There really are. So, Matt, we'll move on to our next one. Trevin Jones taking on Javid Basharat, and I've listened to a lot of Javid Basharat interviews this week, and I love the confidence that he has coming into this matchup. Representing Extreme Couture, he's a former London Shoot Fighters fighter, and it would have been cool to see Javid on next week's card in London, getting that opportunity close to home, but getting an opportunity against Trevin Jones, a name that a lot of people recognize, it's a great opportunity. And the other thing, too, a couple of debuting fighters taking on guys with extensive UFC records, like at least UFC experience. Javid taking on Trevin Jones, who has big wins, and then you have AJ Fletcher taking on Matt Semmelsberger, who has some big wins. Like, you knock guys out in less than 20 seconds. It's pretty cool if you can make it happen a few times. And for Trevin, the trouble is when you look at this fight, B. Reed saying Basharat is a machine, Williams saying Basharat by KO, VT saying riding with Javid. When I watch Javid fight, he is so much busier than Trevin Jones, it's not even funny. Switching stances, pitter-patter, moving his head, moving his body. Like, I love everything that I've seen out of Javid Basharat. I just haven't seen it against great competition.
Exactly. It is a huge step out to be fighting Trevin Jones all of a sudden.
And that's the real trouble for me. So I look at Javid, Taekwondo black belt, fights like it. I made the Pettis comparison, but the only spot where that is the fact that he's willing to throw those spinning exchanges, a spinning wheel kick, end up in a different stance than what he was originally at, and then continue fighting out of that stance. Like, his movement is incredibly fluid, and we talk about it. Like, the Jerry West logo. You know it's Jerry West. You look at that, if you had a silhouette of Javid Basharat, and you went back and you watched some of his fights outside of the UFC, you would instantly recognize him fighting. With Trevin Jones, weights, baits, throws with power. He's billed as a wrestler grappler, but sometimes you have to get him into that. And in his last fight, he had umpteen different opponent changes. Looked like a bag of milk against Said Yakub Kakrakhmanov. And Kakrakhmanov lived up to his potential and fought an immaculate fight, getting a late finish in that one. So you love what you saw out of Kakrakhmanov. You didn't love what you saw out of Jones. You get an opportunity to buy Jones low. I think this is going to be a good fight. But again, the one and only saying Javid's going to destroy him. D. Rod is saying Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Kevin Owens, absolute banger. I saw that's a thing. And Mukhtar is saying, appreciate you, boys. Mukhtar, I appreciate you as well. So a lot of people going with Javid in this fight, Matt. I know we didn't have him at the start of the week.
And it is hard to have him, and you set it up perfectly. Like, if I was standing at a baseball field and I saw someone hit like 15 home runs in a row, I'd be really impressed. But then I'd have to ask myself, okay, who are they hitting those home runs off of? Is it like a major league pitcher? Is it a child? Like, there's a very big range in between. But the result could still be the same no matter what. You get what I mean? The result's very flashy, but we do question the level of competition.
One thing that we normally say about Javid, and I'll hand it right back off to you, is, you're beating poor talent, but you're beating them in the way that we like to see, and that's what he's doing.
And that is a very good point that you bring up, but it's just a huge ask to go from beating regional levels of talent, and I think that's a fair way to describe what the competition was, to fighting Trevin Jones. And like you said, right before you handed it off to me, this is a buy low, sell high for Trevin Jones. He looked awful in his last fight. You're 100% right. Looked small, didn't get anything going off with his striking, just was always on the back foot. It felt like it was very defensive from the opening bell. I think we are going to see a different version of Trevin Jones. Like, just go back to his first 2 UFC fights. Bricks in his hands, and he really has shown off a well-rounded skill set. I know you said he has to almost get brought into the wrestling a little bit, and you are right, but we know that that's a wrinkle in his game plan if the things on the feet aren't going well, so I do like Jones in this fight.
American Born hitting up the super chat saying love the show, and again, like, I look at it and there was a little bit of pushback. I know Dave Baker, if you're out there, you're always in the comments section, but saying that, you look at the overall level of competition, you add everything up, but it's still not that bad. And you consider the last 2 fights they had over Bezkoret Vianney and Oran Kalon over on Contender Series. Oran Kalon 16-0 was blown the F up. Like, it was a really inflated record, and he was a week shy of his 37th birthday at 16-0, and he didn't make weight. Alexander over with Octagon was 11-1, but it was the same thing for him too. So I just offer a little bit of pushback there. I'm taking Jones. I'm staying away from the fight, but to me, I think it's a decent spot for an underdog, a guy who's earned victories over, friggin' Timur Valiev's fighting Jack Shore next week. Like, these are big enough names. Mario Bautista, obviously he was losing until he won. But for me, I'm going to go with the man himself, Trevin Jones, and I'm going to disagree with the majority, but when we have a look, Matt...
Wait, I'm assuming the majority have Trevin Jones.
No, 52% at Fight Night Picks
Really?
going with Javid Basharat. And again...
That really catches me off guard.
No, and he is the favorite in this fight as well. So
I'm very surprised that, like, the Fight Night Picks fans, I guess, didn't rely more heavily on Jones, because I do think the experience factor is really important in this fight.
All right, well, we'll move on to our next one, Matt, and we will go to Jillian Robertson taking on JJ Aldrich, another fight where we disagree with the masses. We really do. And it's odd when it happens, and the people can disagree, and then we get it wrong, and then a lot of people get fired up. But when you look at this fight, Jillian Robertson coming in on short notice, taking on JJ Aldrich. And for Jillian, you look at her Instagram, gym to gym to gym to gym to gym. Now, she's going to have a guy who I saw on Twitter just before I came on here eating bologna and beans out of a small cooktop in front of the UFC Apex, wearing the tightest polo I've ever seen and a bald cap.
I'm so
Dean
confused.
Thomas making fun of Dana White and those videos. Dana White does those Saturday videos where he's eating food.
Oh, no, they're Friday, because it's F Friday. And he's like, I'm going to put donuts inside of a pizza. And they're the worst ideas you've ever heard. And then he gets disappointed that they don't end up tasting good. It's just very upsetting.
All right, well, Gabriel hitting up the super chat saying watching while playing in Elden Ring. Santos gets the dub.
People like an Elden Ring.
But yeah, when it comes to this fight, Matt, for JJ Aldrich, never throws kicks. She's had one fight against Chan Mi Jun where she threw kicks. That's the only fight where she has thrown kicks.
They didn't look natural either.
And so really for her, it's a lot of boxing combinations. It's a decent clinch game, and she can defend takedowns just all right. For Jillian Robertson, striking is not her forte, but grappling definitely is. That's where her bread gets buttered. So in this fight, Matt, Robertson has maybe more paths to victory. I mean, you could see her taking it down, maybe a ground and pound finish. But for me, I like the striking activity of Aldrich, and at least to keep it up on the feet as well.
I don't think Jillian has more ways to win. I think she only has one way to win. If Jillian Robertson doesn't get the takedown, I don't think she can win at the UFC level. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say either, because Robertson's striking has not progressed at all since she has entered the UFC. And I even go back to the Macy Barber fight where she just looked off on her feet. Like, she didn't get anything going with her range-finding weapons. She had no footwork. She just walked backwards, put her hands up, and ate a bunch of big power shots and didn't really move out of the way of them. That's really concerning when you're fighting someone like JJ Aldrich, who, yes, also didn't have a very good fight against Macy Barber, if we are being fair, but Aldrich fights in a very similar manner to someone like Macy Barber, where it's okay, my whole game plan is focused on defending takedowns, making my opponent become a striker, and then I can outstrike my opponents. And you're right, Aldrich isn't some flashy striker. Like, when I watch Yair Rodriguez fight, I think to myself, there's never in a million years I could ever do what he does. You don't watch JJ Aldrich fight and think like, wow, that's something like no one would ever be able to do. It's very meat and potatoes. It's very jab, right hand, reset, gonna defend my takedowns, and then rinse and repeat. I think Aldrich is going to beat the brakes off Jillian Robertson. I really do. I think this is a tough matchup for Robertson because, again, if she can't get the takedown, I don't know how she's going to be able to win rounds. And maybe she gets the takedown quick and rear naked chokes Aldrich. That could be her path to victory, but other than her getting the takedown early in a round and giving her time to grapple and really progress, I think this is a tough matchup for Robertson.
Linny OT going hard in the paint about Javid Bashrat's training partners. Linny, the only thing that I have to offer up about that, because it's a lukewarm take that Trevin Jones is going to win as an underdog. Like, I'm not married to that one. If I get it wrong, it is what it is. But the only thing that I'll say to the training partner comparison is Blood Diamond looked really bad when he took on Jeremiah Wells. That was on an Israel Adesanya card. Martin Sano was in the UFC as Nick Diaz's buddy, and he looked terrible against Matt Semmelsberger.
Slaviklaw's flatlined Dakota Bush, though, so it does go both ways.
The whole training partner thing, you can have the best training partners in the world, and you can still be the best guy in the gym and the worst guy out there on the mat. So it really is tough to make that one. But yeah, it is an argument that I don't necessarily make myself all that often. But when it comes to this fight, Matt, Jillian Robertson, a main training partner of one Hannah Goldie, a former common opponent there. We have a look at the odds for this fight because Robertson, again, in on short notice, opened the favorite, still the favorite, and she is hovering around a minus 125, open to minus 160. You look at it for Jillian Aldrich, my goodness, JJ Aldrich at a plus 103. And if we head on over to the website, to the Instagrams, at Fight Night Picks, the votes, 58% going with Robertson to 42% Aldrich, and I gotta be completely honest, I considered having JJ Aldrich as another bit to the question mark kicks parlay. I do like, JJ Aldrich in this matchup with the volume that she has on the feet.
She has to take a step up in competition at some point, though. Like, Aldrich, 100%. But every Aldrich fight is against someone who's on a losing streak or making their debut. At a certain point, you do have to fight some, like, borderline ranked fighters. And I know that seems like a big jump going from people making their debut to ranked fighters, but in this division, there's not a big separation between those two gaps. So I really do think Aldrich, if she is able to win, somebody with a number next to their name.
All right, Matt, so we'll move on into our next fight. That chat is really heating up over there. Over 600 tuning in for the fight night. Coming up tonight, only 145 likes. You can get that up there. I know you can get that up there to about 300. Our next fight, we have Matt Semmelsberger taking on AJ Fletcher. And if we're making that teammate comparison, you look at Matt Semmelsberger's last win. It was under 20 seconds. He knocked out Martin Sano flat out. Martin, who is Nick Diaz's boy or the Nick Diaz Academy. Now he's taking on AJ Fletcher, who is Alan Jouban's boy, who is Dustin Poirier's boy, a guy who went to LSU to become a middle linebacker. It didn't work out, so he went to the University at Lafayette, and then he transitioned into MMA. And it's been a quick rise for him to get to 9-0, and he had a decent amateur record coming into it. But you look at the way that AJ Fletcher wins his fights, he can wrestle without no wrestling background per se. He doesn't have some flashy collegiate background in wrestling. He doesn't have some high school record even. I mean, you look at a guy like Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan Pierce wrestled in high school at like 123 friggin' pounds, and then he must have hit a big time growth spurt. But for Fletcher, he really does change his levels really well. He'll throw that overhand right and then slip down into a double, get it just about every time. Facing a lower level of competition, albeit, but in this fight against Matt Semmelsberger, you're taking on one of the biggest welterweights known to man. Matt Semmelsberger used to play strong safety at Marriott at 204 pounds. They had him listed, but he was bigger than that. And it's crazy to see. I mean, not that it means a whole lot. Comes in lower in weight on fight day or on weigh-in day, 169 to 170. But I look at this fight. Fletcher has so much power. Semmelsberger, those long-range weapons, his power, good wrestling all around. I think this is a great fight, but I mean, it seems like over in the comment section, Sharif saying AJ's competition is weak. Harley saying smash the like. So that much is appreciated. And Aaron saying Semi the Jedi. And I'm not going to say what that emoji is because that's an emoji that gets you into trouble.
Sure. I think Matthew Semmelsberger has a really great chance to win this fight, but this is one of those weird 50-50 matchups where just stylistically, he is going to be at risk of getting knocked out basically at every moment in this fight. And you're right, Fletcher doesn't have a wrestling background, but he just is like a really good athlete. I know that's a cheap kind of thing to throw out, but like you had a friend Brandon, and I remember playing basketball with him one time. He played rugby, he was very good. The biggest man I've ever seen. Had no idea what he was doing on a basketball court, but he was just so athletic that he could kind of figure it out as long as he knew what the basic rules were.
One of those guys that's wearing basketball shorts all winter, no matter how cold it is.
Exactly. And AJ Fletcher does kind of fall in line with that, where whatever he's going for with a lot of explosion behind it. And I do think that there is a risk for Semmelsberger to mistime a takedown or maybe miss an overhand and get caught with it. Like, Fletcher does have big power, but this is the other thing I'll say. When people think that every photo of you is photoshopped because your arms are so short, it might be an issue. This isn't me poking fun. Like, Semmelsberger does have really good distance management at this weight class, and he does have a really good overhand, and he does get a lot of range out of it. I think it might be tough for Fletcher to at least get started in this fight. Maybe if he does just make it like one of those car wreck matchups where it's just 50-50 all over the place, it'll be a great fight for the fans. I think we can all agree on that. And it will give him a good chance to win, but if you stack up both guys' skills next to each other, Semmelsberger is definitely the most skilled fighter in this one, so that's why I have him.
Yeah, I like Semmelsberger in this fight. In terms of the experience, I like it. I know both guys kind of similar in terms of the amount of fights that they've had. And if you look at it for Semmelsberger, he was a guy that at one point moved training to Fit NHB for one of his camps here not that long ago. You'll know that gym as
Tim Means.
The Dirty Bird, Tim Means gym. You look at it for Fletcher, 9-0 as a pro. You look at the last 5 fights. He beats Christopher Anthony, 10-9, James Freeman, 6-3, 9-17, Wesley Golden, Ariel Juarez, who was 3-4, and then he beats the man himself, Leonardo Demiani, over on Contender Series, and Leonardo just didn't look like he was into that fight. But if you look at it for Semmelsberger, he has lost. He has been held down for different points, but I think in this fight, I'm going with Matthew Semmelsberger. Jamari is saying Semmelsberger with the burger emoji. That's an emoji that I can get into. 70% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with Semmelsberger in this fight. And just my 2 cents saying sup fighting Allens. And Craig Hart saying Yoel Romero equals AJ Fletcher. Yoel Romero, how old is he, I guess? It's kind of like a baseball
Romero,
thing.
Cuban Olympian.
Fausto
AJ
Carmona-esque. Is it Roberto Hernandez? And with AJ Fletcher, a fluffer for his height. Because is he actually 5'10"? I don't know if I believe it. So Matt, we'll move on to our next fight. Alex Pereira taking on Bruno Silva.
Someone's getting knocked out.
And over on MMA Junkie, they use this as the tagline in the interview. So I want to make sure that I get it right from their YouTube page. It was unafraid to strike, and then I watched the interview, and Bruno Silva said, and this was through a translator, there's no way to make history if you are not brave enough. So he doesn't want to go to the well of the grappling, which I think is Bruno Silva's like salvation. And the trouble that I have is when you're eating head kicks and big shots from Jordan Wright and he's sending you back towards the cage, who's to say that Alex Pereira can't do that to you?
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. And I'm going to argue against a lot of what you said, but just hear me out and play this game. Bruno Silva was never coming in here to shoot takedowns. Like, there wasn't a part of you that actually thought he was going to show up to grapple today. Really? I would have been extremely surprised if we saw him take a takedown. Like, that interview to me is well, yeah, of course.
I figured he'd be a little coy with it. I figured that Bruno Silva would at least take part of his camp to try and work the I mean, Alex Pereira is, again, we can talk about...
But like you had mentioned, though, earlier, Khalil Roundtree Jr. isn't as good of a striker as Gokhan Saki. What did he do? Went out there and struck with Gokhan Saki and knocked him out. I'm just saying, a really good MMA striker can knock out a really good kickboxer coming over, and I think that's going to be Bruno Silva's best path to victory, because if he goes for takedowns, I think he's going to get tired, and I think he won't have the knockout power late if this fight does end up going there. And let's be honest, I don't really want this fight to go past the second round, because I'm a little curious about what Pereira's cardio is going to look like at that point, and we all kind of know Bruno Silva's going to fall off if he does miss a lot of power shots. So I worry about what this fight's going to look like late, but I think Silva has a great chance to win this on the feet. I really do.
I don't think Silva falls out late, and there's evidence of that in the UFC in his fight against Andrew Sanchez. He was on the receiving end. He was the nail to the hammer that was Andrew Sanchez, and then in the end still had the power, still had the wherewithal to get that finish. So definitely with Bruno Silva, there's the opportunity. Alex Pereira in this fight is a pretty decent favorite. He's a -200. If I go with Pereira and Miranda Maverick, -350, -200, it's all chalk, and it evens out at a -108. That's what I'm going with the QMK parlay. Again, it's for a bag of popcorn. It's for fun, so we can say that we did it on the channel. But it's one of those fights that it really is tricky. And with Bruno Silva, like, if you think me not picking him to win in this fight doesn't sting my soul, this is a guy I've been on for a very long time, and I love his fight.
So do you agree with what I said before this, though? Do you think the winner will probably get into that, like, 14-15 spot? Because Silva has done much more heavy lifting in the UFC. No one's going to deny that. But if Pereira is able to beat him, I feel like it does do enough to justify his spot in the rankings. And then if Silva wins, I don't know how you could deny him at this point.
No, that's it. I mean, you consider guys kind of hanging around. Like, Kevin Holland was just recently switched over to
That's a good point.
welterweight.
Yeah, there is a spot.
Brad Tavares, I mean, what was the last thing we did other than Omari Akhmedov? So there are guys in that 10 to 15 range at middleweight that you kind of need to get rid of. And even at heavyweight, we've seen that recently. We're going to talk about it next week. Sergey Pavlovich, he was in the rankings last week. His last win was 2019. Shamil Durkimov's ranked 10th. His last win? 2019. So the rankings don't mean much, and I have a hard time respecting them and putting all that much into them. We have a look at Fight Night picks for the total votes on this one. 79% with Pereira to 21% with Silva.
Give me a wild fight.
Again, if Bruno Silva does the old, hey, in my back pocket, I'm just... If Andreas Michailidis can get the takedowns, I can get them too. I would love to see that. But yeah, for me, I've got Alex Pereira in this one.
Yeah, I think Pereira's probably going to win by knockout.
All right, we'll move. I think just if you want to get like not so crazy, and you know what, let's go a little bit off script and just see what the odds are for it, because I'm sure they're juiced too. But fight doesn't go the distance is it's an average -640. So yeah, I mean, I'd be cool with that one, but for me, I'm going with the man himself, Alex Pereira. So Matt, yeah, we'll move on to our next one. Drew Dober taking on T-Rex Terrence McKinney, accepting this fight on 8 days' notice. And if you look at it, Drew Dober is a striker, is a southpaw, can offensively wrestle at times, but defensively cannot at most times. And if you look at it in his last number of fights, it's pretty well been the reason why he's lost them, or at least he's lost certain points with the judges. Against Brad Riddell, he had the takedowns, and he rocked Brad Riddell, which was kind of crazy. And then when you look at this fight, again, Terrence McKinney has that wrestling lineage in his back pocket. You expect him to go to it quickly and early. I do, anyways.
No.
Yeah, 100%.
I think he's going to strike with Drew Dober, at least for a little while. I don't think he's just going to shoot out there and do a double leg.
I think he's going to go straight for the takedown. And for Drew Dober...
Do you want to do a side Fight Night picks bet? What do you want the cutoff to be for first takedown from Terrence McKinney?
Half a round?
90 seconds. No, because half a round's like a good amount of time he could get raw.
Sure, 90 seconds.
90 seconds you think he shoots for?
What is it?
Just do $5, something stupid.
No, you know what we'll do? We'll figure it out.
No, then we're not doing it unless it was a spur of the moment thing, Craig. Come on.
Shot of hot sauce.
No, I'm not doing a shot of hot sauce, Craig.
Lame. All right,
but here's the problem with Terrence McKinney, though. I look at Terrence McKinney like Jordan Poole, basically. It's really exciting when he is out there, but at some point we are going to start seeing those holes in his game, and we haven't up until this point. And that just speaks to what kind of a talent McKinney was coming into the UFC. It's something we talk about a lot. It's people coming in maybe too past their prime, or they just got into the sport a little bit late. Terrence McKinney came at the perfect time. Like, he got into the UFC the second he was catching his stride, and you really have been able to notice that he's more developed than probably I gave him credit for. And he has been able to show that he is a borderline ranked fighter with his skill set. This is his big opportunity, though. And this is what I think is going to cause him problems in this fight. I just think the overall pressure from Drew Dober is going to be really difficult for McKinney to get some of his long-range attacks off of. And for McKinney, I do think he's going to need to set up the takedown with some of his strikes early on in this fight. Because if you just go out there shooting against a guy like Drew Dober, who is the shorter guy, who has great uppercuts, I think that's a recipe to land into a really big shot. And if you look at how Dober was able to fight Alexander Hernandez, it was, I'm going to pressure the wrestler, because if I'm putting the pressure on him, the fight is happening under my terms. And if the fight's happening under Drew Dober's terms, it's going to be one of those in-your-face type of fights. And I think that's what he's going to try to do today.
And for Drew Dober, has great countering abilities. And you look at the finish wins that he had in that little run there. Alexander Hernandez, a big one against the man himself, Nasrat Haqparast, who Like, how crazy is it the fact that he loses to Dober, he loses to Hooker, and he loses to Bobby Green? Like, Nazareth.
He was a big deal at one point.
He's still a huge deal for the channel out there. I think Terrence McKinney shoots in the first 90 seconds. I'd bet a shot of hot sauce on that one all damn day. And when it comes to the overall odds on this fight, you look at it, you get an opportunity on Drew Dober as the favorite, and if you look at it, he opened -150, went as far as a -240, he's -166 right now. And it should note, Matt, when we did the original video, Drew Dober on Sunday was -226. The lines moved about 60 points on that one. If you look at it for Terrence McKinney, opened a +130, went up to a +200 or thereabouts. He's a +139. And if we have a look at Fight Night picks for the total votes on this one, 64% Terrence McKinney to 36% with Drew Dober. That's a surprise, all of it to me. And I'm surprised that much money came in on Terrence McKinney over the week.
It makes no sense to me. Again,
no, it scares me away from the pick, to be completely honest with you.
I don't ever put any of that stock into the pick. I really do think Drew Dober, just stylistically, this is a tough matchup for McKinney. McKinney has good power, but I'm not a big believer in Ferricium. I know I've said that on this channel multiple times. Some other people might be, but I'm not a huge fan. So I don't look at a win over a guy like Ferricium as being, wow, you're ready for Drew Dober on short notice all of a sudden. And that's the other thing, too. Terrence McKinney hasn't had a full training camp for this fight. You know what Drew Dober's been doing the last 2 months? Getting ready for a fight he knew he had this weekend. And I really do think that's a big key.
Different opponent, but for me, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to go out there.
Though.
Every switch of the pick on question mark kicks for me this year has been wrong, but I'm going to go with Drew Dober. He's going to save Ferris in this opportunity, and I think Drew Dober's going to be able to get it done. Again, I edge him in the cardio. I don't like his defensive wrestling. That was a heavy point for me at the start of the week. I'm not necessarily in love with the old line movement throughout the week. So for me, I'm going to switch it. I'm going to go with Drew Dober in this fight. But I think it's going to be a heck of a fight because, again, it's such a good opportunity for Terrence McKinney to vault right up the ranks.
We learn a lot about Terrence McKinney today.
That much is true. So, Matt, we'll move on to our next fight. We have Khalil Roundtree taking on Carl Robertson. And if you're going to sit here and tell me that Carl Robertson is some world-class striker, he's 0-3 in kickboxing, and he's, 9-4 in MMA. And he has more success when he grapples than when he strikes with most guys. And you look at it, the Roman Kopylov fight, he was able to go out there and do that. And Roman, all he pretty much has is he sticks behind a jab and he can throw the cross, but that's pretty much all you're going to get out of him. When I look at this fight, Matt, Khalil Roundtree, if he's going to win, he's got to be on. It's like the Uriah Hall effect. Like, Khalil has to show up and be ready to put on a good fight. And we talked about it. That Marcin Prachnio fight, full training camp, whatever it was, training in the States versus training in Thailand, he looked flat. He really did. And he had opportunities to finish Marcin Prachnio, and he took his foot way off the gas and coasted. So
you're describing Khalil Roundtree like they describe Carmelo Anthony coming off the bench. Like, when he's engaged, we can get something good out of him tonight. That's not a great way to be talked about when you're a fighter on the main card of a UFC Fight Night. But that sort of speaks to this fight and where these guys stand in the division.
All of this true. I mean, yeah, like, just look at the records. It's nothing stellar. But for Khalil Roundtree, he had another good bounce back his last time out. The Syndicate MMA camp is something that we got to see out of him. And for Carl Robertson, I mean, hey, he was happy to make the weight. I like to see that smile out of him standing on the scale, because he did. He made 205 successfully, which, it's been an issue for him.
Local man does his job.
Oh, it's been a hard time for him. And again, you look at the 5-on-in for Robertson. The loss to Glover, the win over Wellington Turman by split, the win over Roman Kopylov, the loss to Vettori, the loss to Brendan Allen. So pretty much he's losing to the light heavyweight champion, a top 5 contender in Vettori, and Brendan Allen, who sneaks around the top 15. For Khalil, a loss to Johnny Walker, a win over Eric Anders, a loss to Kutsilaba, a loss to Prachnio, a win over Benestas Bukowskis. The level of competition is not quite there. So again, Donnie Dimes saying, man, I was really high on Modestas Bukowskis, or however you spell it. Khalil worked him. I know how you feel, Donnie. I was a big fan of him. He was a lot of fun to watch, but it didn't work out. Last thing, Robertson fought at 205 LOL and almost finished Glover. But Matt, when we look at this fight, again, you expect both guys to strike, or at least I do, right?
Without a doubt, because Robertson's the better the better grappler. Not a great wrestler, though, so we just kind of lack the transition in between the two. This fight's going to be contested on the feet, though, and You could make a strong argument either way. You really could. Because for Robertson, I would say he's a more accurate striker. He's probably the more active striker too, but he doesn't really have that one-punch power that you really expect with a guy of his striking background. And he is someone who will go for the grappling after he drops his opponent. He'll get the knockdown, then try to wrap you up on the ground. And I can't believe I'm about to make a Hanato Moicano connection. But you get the idea. Like, with Moicano, he's godly at jiu-jitsu though, so it's a little different. He hurts you on the feet, submits you on the ground. With Robertson, same idea, he just hasn't really been able to put it all together on the feet. This fight, to me, the loser, I don't know what we're doing at this point. I think Khalil Roundtree is the more powerful guy, like I said, and not just because of his last fight. Like, that last fight was disgusting against Bukauskas, where he hit him with that side kick to the knee. Very, very gross. I don't expect the same thing to happen. But honestly, yeah, you could convince me of either guy. I think Robertson's going to be able to win just because of his striking output. But if Roundtree can get like leg kicks together, he can put together a really good fight.
And I think that he will in this spot. And B. Reed was asking, is Robertson training with Corey Anderson, right? He is. He has throughout. And it's produced 9 and 4. And
does it add an hour and a day to your week?
It could. He's looked hellish over with Bellator, and they got a big time card coming up too. I know people talking about it there. Adam Boric is a hell of a fighter. I love watching him fight, so it should be a lot of fun. But Matt, we'll move on to our next one. We're split on the pick there. I've got Roundtree over Robertson. Sadiq Yusuff is taking on Alex Caceres, and I see, Clint is out there. I think he's got Caceres. I think he sprinkled in submission maybe out there. Alex Caceres on this tidy little win streak. Obviously, it isn't against the greatest level of competition, but he has looked good. And, in his last fight against Sung Woo Choi, he's that jab, cross, drops, and then Choi isn't able to finish the fight on the mat. If you look at it for Sadiq Yusuff, man, the only thing that I have an issue with him is the fact that he gets cracked by Gabriel Benitez and gets stanky leg before he comes back and ends up getting the finish in that fight. He gets dropped in the first round of his last fight against Arnold Allen, but then he rallies back and had a super strong third round, which you'd think for a guy that kind of plodding forward, power shots, that normally doesn't translate to a third round. 100%. But it did work out for him his last time out, so I did like to see that one. But when we look at this fight, again, Alex Caceres, win streak, his own gym now, pretty cool. I have a hard time seeing Alex Caceres beat Sadiq Yusuff, but it could happen.
Do you remember when Charles Oliveira was beating up on a lot of unranked guys before he was given the opportunity to fight Kevin Lee? Like, the day the world stood still, because that was like the first pandemic day, so they got everyone out of the crowd. Up until that point, he had fought Jared Gordon, he had fought Nick Lentz 14 times. Like, there was no reason to take him serious until there was a reason to take him serious. And I'm not saying Alex Caceres is like Charles Oliveira, but what I'm saying is, his win streak right now is similar to the early parts of Oliveira's win streak, where it's not that impressive if you really start to break down the names. And for Caceres, he has improved at this stage of his career. I think that's fair to say. But I don't think he's improved enough to now go out there and beat someone like Sadiq Yusuff, who, yes, he has had some time off after that Arnold Allen loss, but he is a much better fighter than Alex Caceres. At least when it comes to where this fight's going to be contested. Does Alex Caceres have offensive takedowns? Not really. If you are a pure striker and you don't have much by way of grappling, he can take it to the ground, get a little tricky that way. But he's not the type of fighter who's going to rely on his wrestling to go out there and use it to win rounds and win fights. So I don't think he can out-wrestle Yusuff. Does he have power to hurt Yusuff early? Not really, and that's what I keep on going back to, because you're right, Yusuff does have a susceptibility to getting cracked early in fights. It's almost like he has to warm up to it, and even once he does warm up to it, his striking defense isn't the greatest you've ever seen. It's just by the time he starts hitting you with his power shots, you're a lot less focused on landing your own because he hits so hard. And I think we're going to see a very similar fight to that in this. I think Yusuff's going to get on the inside of his range, and I think he's going to beat him up to the body and to the head.
If you have a look at the odds for this one, the only thing that scares me away is the fact that Sadiq Yusuff's a pretty big favorite. Minus 267 right now on best fight odds. Caceres plus 216. That line at one point, Caceres plus 183, 184, now up to plus 216. If we have a look at Fight Night picks for the total votes on this fight, they're not that close. 76% have Yusuff to the 24% that are going with Alex Caceres. So both of us in agreement on this one, going with Sadiq Yusuff. But the guy's got to fight more often.
I was just going to say, Bruce Leroy's going to make it fun, though, and that's all that matters. Like, I don't expect Caceres to just fold over after getting hit by one big shot. Like, I think he's going to make a fun fight out of this, and this should be a good one.
Kurtar is saying the Iowa-Indiana game is crazy, and we move into our co-main event. Marlon Moraes is taking on Sadiq Yusuff. I want to hear from the fans. I mean, you guys got to let us know who you have in this fight, because for Marlon, switching up the angles, like an old Drizzy Drake song. And for him, he's gone over to Tiger Muay Thai to get ready for this fight camp. You love to see it because, listen, if he's going to go out, he's going out on a shield, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
And taking on Sung Yadong, training at Team Alpha Male with Poppins. Corey McKenna, the return next weekend. So when you look at this fight, Matt, I mean, for Sung Yadong, I look at these guys as both very well-rounded. In the comments section, the super chat from Jesse Crayford saying,
Thank you, Jesse.
Put this on Negamarianu and Maverick. Listen, old Nikolai Negamarianu, heck of a win last week.
Did he deserve it? Maybe not, but he won.
By the skin of his teeth, as they say. But when you look at this one, Matt, for Marlon, again, and we've talked about it, it's
an awful fight for him.
It's a bad fight for him, but at the same time, he's had these little glimpses. So again, in the fight against Corey Sandhagen, probably not.
Gets his orbital broken wheel kicked. Let's actually go through the damage he's sustained because it's very significant.
Looks great against Henry Cejudo.
And then eats 15 ground and pound shots that are really, really clean, and those are the type of shots that take a toll on you.
Didn't beat Jose Aldo, but it's a dub.
It was a close fight.
Corey Sandhagen, tons of damage. The fight against Rob Font starts off very strong.
And it's another arguable late stoppage because he gets hit with a clean right uppercut, he's out on his feet, and then just gets hit by an avalanche of strikes.
And then against Merab, he looked great at the start, and then he didn't. And
it's bad. And that's the problem. Marlon isn't just losing by knockout, and it's it's one shot and it's over. All of these have been sustained beatings to the point where you kind of do have to worry. If you shoot 3-pointers in the NBA, Steph Curry is in a shooting slump for half the season. But you don't worry about him next season or the year after, or next week. You can always feel like he's going to be able to put it together because, it's just form. It's basketball. It's not that big of a deal. With Marlon, that damage never comes back. You don't ever get your durability once it's gone, and I do feel like we've reached that point with Marlon. And now it's to the point where it's not even clean shots that hurt him. If you do hit him with a clean jab, you might be able to get him out on his feet. And someone like Song Yadong, who is technical, accurate, and is really good at staying composed in the pocket. I don't think he's going to freak out if he does get into an early fight with Marlon. And I really do think one clean strike from Song could put Marlon out, and one clean shot from Marlon could hurt Song. I just don't know if he has anything after that one big shot.
Pulse Reloaded, Marlon has a brutal KO win over the current Bantamweight champ. Put some respect on his name. He definitely has. He's got a freaking hell of a career. You look at it, World Series, he was at the top of the pops. He ends up in the UFC, loses to a Sun Tzu. Remember the last time he fought a Sun Tzu?
Has this been said in a Utica coffee shop? Hey, I remember where I was when Marlon Moraes fought Jimmy Rivera. Wild fight.
No, well, it was quickly wild. It was quickly wild. But yeah, for me, I'm going with Song Yadong in this fight. I see a lot of people that are really high on Song Yadong, and I am. Him, I love his boxing. I like, how his wrestling has progressed throughout his career. He's one of those guys that came in and you just thought, okay, this is a young guy with a ton of pro experience. What are we going to get out of him? We've happened to get a pretty darn good fighter. So, biggest test for him for sure. I've got Yadong in this one. But again, both guys are a lot of fun to watch. The only thing that scares me is the fact that Marlon, if you look at the last fight against Merab, that fight was 5 months and a week ago, and getting ready for next week with Corey McKenna, she's been out for so long because she had terrible concussions and wasn't allowed to even train. She's been cleared for 5 months, but then it takes a while to get back into the queue to get fights. So it scares me when you get knocked out.
That's a really good point though, Craig, and I'm happy you bring it up, because if you go back 5 months to a fight, a training camp is normally 2 months, right? 8 weeks. So he's taking shots to the head, presumably, only a few short months after a really vicious knockout like that. I think that's a good point that doesn't get brought up enough.
Well, I mean, Tiger Muay Thai, are they known for their, it's just like Hawaii with Max Holloway. Are we training over Zoom? No, we're probably going to be sparring. So, Matt, we'll move into our main event. Thiago Santos, Magomed Ankalaev, or as the British people would say, Ankalaev. And, Matt, when you look at this one, for Ankalaev, the one loss is to another guy that fights next week, and it's Paul Craig. He's taking on Nikita Krylov. But in this one, for Ankalaev, with that lone blemish of a last-second Hail Mary submission loss, he has looked very good. I'd say highlight performance in the UFC, Dacha Lungiambula knockout, probably.
I would say.
That head kick, front kick, it's insane. He had a great first round against Volkan Oezdemir, lost the second round, came back in the third. The craziest thing about Magomed is that everybody focuses on his sniper-like striking. They don't really focus on the fact that he can wrestle and he can grapple, and it's kind of an underappreciated part of his game. So over in the comments section, who do we have? Just my 2 cents. You can't get dropped by a jab from Rob Font. Yeah, that one's tough, right? Pulse Reloaded, the hammer tattoo for the upset here. Laos Non saying Ankalaev wins whether he wants to or not.
And that's kind of my whole thing about Ankalaev. Like, he's sort of got this Gegard Mousasi attitude about fighting, where it's like, yeah, it's just something I do. And it's weird, because it even kind of expresses itself in the way he fights, where he'll get off to a strong start, to where you think he's going to win in 2 minutes. And then he just kind of takes his foot off the gas pedal. And it's always been strange to me. Like, even going back to the Volkan Oezdemir fight, and I'm not just trying to use his last fight as the only example, but gets off to an amazing start, and you're thinking to yourself, wow, like, Volkan's either so far over the hill, like, what are we going to do with him anymore? Or is Ankalaev, like, potential next champ? And then he kind of takes his foot off the gas, and they just sort of fight almost like a 50-50 fight from that point on. And that does concern me when you are starting to fight guys at the top of the division. You have to go out there and take rounds from people. You can't give them away, especially in 5-round fights like these. Like, Anthony Smith is someone who takes a lot of heat from MMA fans because he has been in a lot of, like, main event opportunities, and he might not be the greatest, but just hear me out. Anthony Smith is the type of fighter who would really cause somebody like Ankalaev issues, I think, because he's very steady. And I do think that a steadiness is something that a fighter is going to have to beat someone like Ankalaev. But then we're going to go to the other half of tonight's co-main event. I love watching Thiago Santos fight. Craig, do you like watching Thiago Santos fight?
I used to.
Thank you. It was one of the great spectacles in MMA. And then he fought John Jones. And sometimes injuries take their tolls on fighters. And we talked about damage with Marlon Reich in the last fight. Knee injuries also take their tolls on you, and when you are a fighter who uses his footwork and explosiveness quite a bit, I do worry about you post-knee injuries and post-knee surgeries, and I do think Santos has gotten somewhat back to the form that he looked before those knee injuries. I do think that's an important point that has to be brought up, because he looked awful, let's just be honest. Like, in the direct aftermath after that John Jones fight, I do feel like against Walker he had his legs under him a little bit more. It was still more like Michael Jordan in the playoffs against the Orlando Magic, though, after playing baseball.
And in the Glover fight, the trouble was you're planning and you're trying to throw with your body, and you're not.
He did drop him twice, though. That's what I keep on going back to with the Glover fight.
So the striking to me was pretty good in that fight. Obviously, the explosiveness was a little wonky. But then the fight against Johnny Walker, it was like reserved, almost waiting for Johnny Walker, but he was also leading the dance. It was just such an odd fight. And then the fight against Rakic, if you really go back, that was bad. Like, that was just bad. And I could see Ankalaev doing that. I could see him peppering him a little bit in the first round, working in some of the takedowns, making it boring, and Ankalaev wins a fight, and then he's in the same spot as Islam Makhachev, where they try and give him like a short notice guy next week, and he says no. I don't see Ankalaev. Unless he wins his fight impressively, no title shot.
I agree,
weak division.
This is the difference, though. I think Islam Makhachev could be champion at any day. I don't think that about Ankalaev at all.
I do.
Okay, fair enough. For me, I don't actually see him as getting that ceiling to be in the title picture, because I think Yuri Prochazka could be, well, of course, he's a hard fighter for anybody, but I think that'd be a really difficult matchup for him. I think Anthony Smith would be too. I think he'd beat the guys like Dominic Reyes in this division. Honestly, if you put him and Jan Blachowicz in a fight together, it'd probably be pretty fun, but I don't know if I've ever been sold on Ankalaev's ceiling as a champion. I guess I could be proven otherwise today, but I think this is going to be a very interesting fight, though, for the division. But the problem is, and I keep on going back to this in the back of my mind, there's a chance we get another, like, Rakic Santos or Santos Walker, where, like, you might get a couple flashes here or there, but for the most part, it's probably just going to be Ankalaev leading the dance.
Well, it's going to be a lot of fun regardless, both of us with Magomed Ankalaev here, and to me, I think Prochazka wins the belt, and I think he holds on to it, but I mean, if Ankalaev got that fight today against Glover, I would have Ankalaev in that one. I think it'd be a good fight. I think it'd be a good fight.
Come on now. That's a ridiculous thing. He just beat Volkan Oezdemir by decision. Glover's beaten everybody and stopped them for like 3.5 years. I don't know what that phase is.
Oh, Yuri's going all the way, but...
I agree. No. Yuri probably will, but you can't disrespect old man Glover like that.
Southpaw Picks having a good time over there in the comment section. Appreciate you for tuning in and tossing the flag emoji out there. Pulse Reloaded agree. I feel Kutelaba was his ceiling. Oh, come on. There were so many people that were so hung up on the fact the first fight, was it a knockout? Was it not a knockout? He went back to back, just like Drizzy Drake, if you want the Canadian reference. So, Matt, when we start back to back and back at the start, both of us with Azamat Murzakanov in this one.
Yes.
All right, so we'll move into our next fight. Kris Moutinho, Guido Cannetti. I would not put my hard-earned money on this one.
No, if you do, I have a lot of questions. I like Kris Moutinho in this fight. It should be a fun fight, but I don't expect either guy to get a title shot off of it.
Moutinho, probably by decision. Guido, maybe first round. And if he's able to if he doesn't get the finish in the first round, if he's at least strong in the second round, he could win a decision. But I don't expect him to win a third round. Dacha Lungiambula taking on Cody Brundage, split on the pick. I've got I've got the old college wrestler here, Cody Brundage.
I've got Dacha, but every time I pick him, he loses, and every time I pick against him, he wins. So.
Miranda Maverick taking on Sabina Mazo. I have Miranda Maverick as one half the QMK parlay.
Oddly important
rich.
fight.
It's rich, minus 350, but I do have her there.
I think this should be a really fun fight. Honestly, I do think Maverick's going to have to prove to us something that she hasn't been able to do lately, and it's just be aggressive. Like, get back to that mindset that got so many MMA fans excited about you in the first place. So I like Maverick in this matchup, but this is an oddly important fight for both fighters.
100%. We move into our next one, Matt. We have Damon Jackson taking on Kamuela Kirk. I have Kamuela Kirk coming out of Siege MMA with Santino DeFranco and crew.
I like... Goodness gracious. I like Damon Jackson in this matchup. I forgot what fight we were on. It should be a really fun one. And like you said, him and Kamuela Kirk are kind of two sides of the same coin to where they are really well-rounded. And this fight will be fun no matter where it takes place. On the feet, on the mat, or in the clinch. I think this is going to be a really fun fight. But I do like Damon Jackson.
Jonathan Ingram's figured out the secret sauce. When I might forget the start of my sentence, you just throw that one in there. And it's like Mrs. Dash. We have Tyson Jumpins. We have Trevin Jones taking on a tricky fighter in Javid Basharat, and I think for Javid, a great opportunity here. We talked about it, the fact that he's moved things from London Shoot Fighters over to Extreme Couture. He talked about it in an interview earlier on this week with James Lynch that'll have Amir Albazi in his corner, a guy that I wish we could see more often at 125, because he is an awesome fighter to watch. In this one, I've got the underdog, which is not the popular pick, but I do have Trevin Jones here. But again, it's one of those ones I'm not sprinkling on anything. I think it's just a learning experience to get more tape on Javid Basharat for me.
I like Jones in this matchup.
All right, so we move into our next fight, Matt. We have Jillian Robertson taking on JJ Aldrich. Both of us going with JJ Aldrich.
Again, this is another oddly important fight because this division's wide open. But yeah, Aldrich has shown the ability to defend basic takedowns and really be able to box up her opponents on the feet, and I expect her to do that.
Enzio 814, do you guys do fight companions and watch-alongs? Yeah, they're called sidekicks.
Do we ever?
We do them for the pay-per-view cards, but yeah, they're a lot of fun. And if everybody that was tuned in here was tuned into that, we'd be rocking and rolling. Semmelsberger Fletcher, I've got Semmelsberger here.
I also like Semmelsberger, but this fight's closer than it should be. I really do think Fletcher has a good chance of landing something crazy. Although I do pick Semmelsberger, there are some red flags in this one.
All right, Matt, we will move on to it. Caglin saying, guys, we trusting on Moutinho, yes or no? Caglin, no, but again, like, I wouldn't do anything with that fight. I think it's very, very silly.
Trusting him like a mean ex-girlfriend. Not at all.
Trusting him like an old pen that you found in a parking lot. So, Alex Pereira taking on Bruno Silva. Both of us going with the tricky man himself, the former Glory 2-division champion, Alex Pereira.
We've talked a lot about experience on this episode, and I know it's kind of counterintuitive to then pick Pereira, but I think Bruno Silva's coming into this fight looking for a knockout. He's going to be standing, and when you're standing with a guy like Alex Pereira, unless your name is like Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker, those types of fighters in this division, I think you're going to have a really, really tough night in the office, so I like Pereira in this one.
All right, Matt, we move into our next fight. We have Drew Dober taking on Terrence McKinney, and for this, I'm saying Drew Dober. Save Faris Ziam. I switch in the pick. To Drew Dober. I switching.
I like Drew Dober in this matchup. I really do think his pressure is going to cause Terrence McKinney issues, and that's the thing about McKinney. We've yet to see him beyond the retreat in the octagon. That would just be an interesting scenario to see. How does he react to it? Because even if he wins, the good thing about this fight is that he's going to have to show us something he hasn't yet, and that's exciting for all of us, because if you do think he is that high-level prospect, you're going to want to see a little bit more out of him. I think this is a great matchup, and I've got Drew Dober.
Should be a lot of fun for sure. So then we move into our next one, Matt. Roundtree, Robertson, split on this one too. I've got Khalil Roundtree.
Got Robertson, but I have no confidence in that pick.
No, it's another one of those weird ones. Sadiq Youssef taking on Caceres. Both of us going with Super Sadiq Youssef.
This is a tough matchup for Caceres. I really do think it is.
We have a co-main event of Marlon Moraes taking on Song Yadong. Both of us going with Team Alpha Male Song Yadong in this fight.
This is probably going to be a sad fight.
All right, Matt.
Song Yadong, though.
And then we move into Santos, and as the British say, once again, Ankalaev. I don't know where they get Ankalaev from, but Magomed Ankalaev taking on Thiago Santos. And listen, if Santos wins, it's going to be a lot more fun. It's going to be wild.
He doesn't have a great chin, though, so maybe Ankalaev can get something wild off. But that's the thing. With Santos, you kind of do rely on him to land, like, some crazy knockout blow. And now that he doesn't have the explosion behind it, you just don't really know where it's coming from.
The only thing, at least we get this out of the start. We get, na-na-na-na-na-na-na, my heta. And you get that song, and that's pretty cool.
That's how big of a deal Thiago Santos is. Someone wrote a song
if
about
Magomed Ankalaev has anything like a walkout song that we had over at the Eagle FC last night, I'll fall asleep. Chael Sonnen called it out. There were a lot of terrible, terrible walkout songs over there. But I digress. We made it through the entire 14-fight slate. We got a big-time card coming up next weekend with UFC London. I mean, it's headlined, I'm going to say tentatively, by Aspinall and Volkov.
Volkov is good to fight.
Volkanov's Instagram is private now. Volkov, his Instagram is private, which is really weird.
But his manager did come out and say that they've already secured the visa, so I don't think it's going to be an issue at all for him. I've done a lot of research on this in the last week, and from everything I've read, it seems like everything's going to go.
So it should be good that way. Paddy Pimblett taking on Kazula Vargas. In the co-main event, you've got Arnold Allen taking on Dan Hooker.
That's going to be such a fun fight.
Oh yeah, that's a big-time fight. There's a lot of prospects throughout, and it should be a good one, especially with the debut of Muhammad Makayev taking on Cody Durden, and their styles match up great for that one, too.
It's just nice to see UFC London back. It's one of those cards every single year that you can get excited for. It's like a fight night card, but bigger than just a fight night card. And I think this one next weekend is going to show that. Like, great fights top to bottom. Great main event, too. I know sometimes we can be hard on these fight cards and how sometimes the co-main events are great and we'll brag on the main event, but I really do think the card next weekend is top tier.
Should be a great one. Thanks to everybody who tuned in to Fight Night Picks Kicks this weekend. You toss a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more of that great content. You'll know when we go live with these shows. Kicks 2 hours before the prelims. We have the Fight Night Picks sidekicks for those big time pay-per-view cards where we hang out here, chat with you during the main card, and then all of the other great content that's coming out on the channel. And you can find the website too, fightnightpicks.com. So for me, switching the pick with Drew Dober, which again, it has not worked out for me in 2022. So here's hoping that it does for Matt and for everybody here. It should be a great one. And yeah, as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.